Hi, welcome everybody. This is Beth Martin, and I'm the Interim Director of the Climate Change Program at Washington University. And we're thrilled to have you here with us tonight for our final climate conversation of this particular school year. I imagine that no one is actually where they expected that they would be, but we really do appreciate that you're here and that you've joined us online to hear about renewable energy careers from some of our terrific and amazing alums. So I am gonna turn the show over to Sarah Masiano, who is a senior climate associate in the climate change program, who will be graduating this year. She has worked with us since she was a sophomore, so we're going to miss her very much. But I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and she's going to get the conversation going this evening. Sarah?
Hello. Hi, everyone. Yes, as she said, my name's Sarah. I'd just like to give a big thank you to everyone attending our panel today. It's very exciting that we've been able to do this. And I'd also like to give a thank you to our wonderful panelists and our moderator this afternoon. Today we have Jordan Chow with Green Street Power Partners, Sean Fallon with Renewables Engineering at Invenergy, Taylor Blevin with Ørsted, and Rachel Goldstein with Solar Energy Industries Association. We also have a wonderful moderator today, Sophia Dawson. Sophia is part of the class of 2021 at WashU. She's double majoring in finance and economics and strat. And as an intern with the Office of Sustainability, she created and helped create and lead Reset, the guided internship program under the sustainability umbrella. And this program has grown since into the 3-credit course that you can take. And as a TA, she's helped develop and implement this course vision throughout the coming semesters and helped create content and assignments, coordinate field trips, and advise teams through their final presentations for the client, which has been the city of St. Louis. I'd also like to, before we start, go over briefly how this webinar will be functioning. So everyone in the webinar right now is muted, but the questions to panelists can be posed through the Q&A function at the bottom of everyone's screen. And we will be following this Q&A and compiling these questions to share with the panelists during the discussion session. And we really want to encourage you all to please ask questions. We want this to be as interactive a conversation as possible, especially given these circumstances. And we really hope that we can address all the different facets of this conversation that you might be interested in. So with that, I will turn it over to Sophia.
Thanks so much. Hi. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Really glad that you could be with us today. My name is Sophia. I will be moderating the panel. And I'm very, very excited to have all these lovely panelists with me here today. The way this is going to work is first I'm going to provide a brief bio on each candidate. I'll ask each panelist to tell us a little bit about themselves. And then we're going to go into discussion period. We'll open up the floor to Q&A. I have some questions prepared, but I'll also be keeping my eye out for questions that are submitted to just make sure everybody gets to hear what they'd like to hear. So without further ado, let's dive in. Starting out with Taylor. Taylor Blevin is a renewable energy project finance professional at Ørsted. She is a renewable energy developer, Ørsted, sorry, is a renewable energy developer specializing in large-scale onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, and storage projects. Taylor graduated from WashU with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering in 2017, and then a master's in energy, environmental, chemical engineering in 2018 from WashU as well. Taylor also holds a certificate in renewable energy and environment from iCares. Taylor, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in the energy industry?
Sure, thanks, Sophia. So Sophia mentioned I'm currently a senior project finance analyst at Ørsted. My group within Ørsted is Ørsted Onshore North America, which which was formerly Lincoln Clean Energy based out of Chicago. Our group specifically is focused on onshore wind projects and solar and storage projects within the US, although we are working on expanding our footprint to international markets as well. Within that group, my role on the project finance team is, as the title suggests, to finance our various projects. And that can be buy or sell side M&A activity for early stage projects all the way through our operational portfolio, as well as tax equity financings for both wind and solar projects. In previous roles at other developers or at debt providers or tax equity investors, I've also worked on construction financing, debt financing facilities, as well as permanent debt. And one of the things that I found sort of most interesting about working for a developer in my two most recent roles has been in a position like mine, you really do sit in the middle of everything that touches the project. So whether it's the engineering side of things, the legal side, the development, community organization, you really get to get your hands on every single piece of that project and then bring it all together into a package that is financeable, whether it's on the debt equity or tax equity sides of things. Obviously, my background is in engineering, not traditionally in finance. So it's a little bit of a different background for someone who's typically in my role, but I've really liked being able to see various parts of the project that are maybe not necessarily in my wheelhouse, whether from an academic or professional standpoint. I started sort of my path to a renewable energy career actually at WashU's Office of Sustainability, working on the renewable energy team for about, I believe it was 3.5 years by the time I finished up my master's. And following those internship experiences, I worked at the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, which is focused on development finance in high impact international markets. So I was on their global energy team working on debt financing for wind and solar across mostly Africa and Latin America, but I also did some work in India and Indonesia as well. Following that, during my master's year, I worked with Rockwood Group in St. Louis, which is a tax equity advisory firm that focuses in mostly on solar transactions, but also brought together a lot of former wind industry professionals as well, working in the tax equity side of things. Then following that, I pivoted, worked at Cypress Creek Renewables for about 1.5 years before, and Cypress Creek is mostly focused on distributed generation solar assets across the US. And then when I had the opportunity to move to Ørsted, it was a great opportunity to pivot and gain some additional experience with the wind asset class as well.
Thanks so much, Taylor. A quick clarifying question, if you don't mind. So your background is in engineering, but it looks like you've been doing a lot of work in finance, and especially since your internship with the Office of Sustainability. Would you have any insight for us on like what led that pivot?
Yeah, so I started, probably around my junior year of undergrad, looking into the various career opportunities that would fit into my interests. I always knew that I wanted to work in renewables in some capacity. I came into school thinking that I was going to go on the PhD track, more on the research side of renewables, and then realized that I tend to be a little bit more impatient, and I have so much respect for everyone who does work in research, because I worked in a lab at WashU for a while and really enjoyed the day-to-day work, but for me, it was frustrating sort of not seeing the direct impact of that work on a shorter time frame. So I started just thinking about what other opportunities might be out there for me that, I could still use my passion for sustainability and green energy in general, and then, pivot to something that, might be a little bit more satisfying for me personally. And I was lucky enough to get the job at the Office of Sustainability and really was given quite a bit of latitude to sort of dive into the projects that I found most interesting, which ended up being building pretty robust financial models for analyzing both on and off-campus wind and solar projects. So that sort of became a passion project for me that helped sort of launch me on the career trajectory that I'm on currently.
Thanks so much for the clarification. That's I think it's fantastic how you've been able to take a look, reassess, and be able to bridge your interests and your strengths in such an amazing way. Thank you. So next I have the pleasure of introducing Jordan Chow. He is an asset management analyst at Green Street Power Partners. Jordan graduated from WashU in 2018 with a major in environmental science and a minor in finance. Currently, he helps manage close to 100 megawatts of solar assets, overseeing the technical and financial performance of said assets. So Jordan, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are?
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about Green Street first. So we're a pretty young company, about 5 or 6 years old. Originally starting out on the residential side of the business, but then moving on to right now, we operate small commercial to small utility scale solar projects throughout the country and looking international as well. We are an owner and developer of the project. So what makes us a little bit unique is we not only develop the project, so that's going out, looking at the land, installing the solar system, getting it up and running so it can connect to the grid, but also owning said asset for, the 20 to 35 year lifetime of the project. And, it really gives everyone at the company a sort of stake in the projects and really makes it so that every project is sort of our own. And especially on the asset management side, I kind of see all these projects as my children almost, having to manage them all. But my path in the company, so I originally started as an intern working on the development side. So that was really, looking at land via GIS maps, Google Maps, looking for areas that were most suitable to solar. During that time frame as an intern between my junior and senior year at WashU, I was actually able to help bring in a 3 megawatt project. So that really helped spur my interest sort of in the renewable energy sector and solar specifically. And then, so after that, after I graduated, I joined the Green Street team full-time, initially as an underwriting analyst. So that was the initial modeling of any solar projects that came in. So that was sending term sheets out to prospective landowners or off-takers, working with the financial models, putting in the inputs, and really trying to, figure out how we can make a project viable financially. Because, as my boss likes to say, we're a finance shop that specializes in renewable energy and solar. So you have to make the finances work before really installing anything. But then after a couple months, there was a need in the company on the asset management side. So I was able to transition, and now, have really by myself and one other person, because we're a small company, have grown this sort of asset management side of the company. So, we started out managing around 5 projects to now managing 50, and as Sophia said, close to 100 megawatts. So a lot of work on that side. But my day-to-day, there's kind of 2 aspects. One is the technical performance of any solar projects. So that's going into our data platforms and looking at inverters, looking at the panels themselves, looking at the weather, trying to figure out really, how we can optimize the performance of any of our projects. Because at the end of the day, the more efficient our projects can become, the more revenue on the back end we can get out of them. And then, that kind of leads into the whole second side of asset management, which is really the financing component. So that's anywhere from invoicing all of the people participating in the project, whether that's hundreds of people on a community solar level to one specific off-taker, sending out invoices to them and making sure that they're happy from a client relations standpoint, to also prepping financial reports, both quarterly, yearly, monthly, for any of our, multitude of investors that invest in our projects, because there's a lot of good incentives for large investors to come in. And that's a little about the company, my path to Green Street. So I was always interested in, the outdoors and the environment, and really wanting to focus my career goals in that area. So naturally started with an environmental science degree at WashU. Like Taylor was, maybe thinking going into research, exploring that side, but like her, really wanted to see my impact. I really liked, being able to work on something and then seeing the, impact of whatever I worked on. So that's why I decided to get a minor in finance, because I realized really to make things work in any political climate, especially ours, everything sort of needs to be tied to a financial component. So if you can make something that's green sound really financially viable, you won't have a problem marketing it to anyone. So that's how I decided to have the finance minor, and then just started looking for renewable energy companies. Green Street happened to come up. I interned with them. Also interned with a aviation focused investment bank to help my finance side of my repertoire be a little bit more firm. And then after graduation, didn't have anything lined up while a senior in college, but reached out to Green Street, reached out to a couple other companies, and happened to jump on board the Green Street team, and very glad I did. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and my path there.
Thank you, Jordan. This is a great story. Sounds like great work you guys are doing. Quick question for you. So like Taylor, you have a science background, but you're in finance. Have you been able to apply your environmental science knowledge at all? If so, in what ways has it still been helpful?
Yeah, definitely. So in my current role, it's definitely not as much science focused. It helps to, be able to look at documents and understand, the science language. So if there are issues with, the land, whether it's in wetlands or, there's a, component that we need to pay because we happen to, be really close to a conservation area, we have to pay a fee so that, a benefit to them. It helps to understand the language. I really do say, though, that on the front end of the development, so that's the initial modeling of the site, the looking at the land to making sure it's viable for solar, there's a lot of, science components or environmental science components that play into there. We have to conduct, or we third party this stuff out, but we have to conduct wetland surveys, we have to conduct environmental assessments on the land or the buildings. So all of that, more environmental science, environmental engineering side of experience really just comes in on the front end. So it's not necessarily to say that it's not, there in the industry. It happens not to be as focused in the role I'm in, but definitely on the front end, construction, initial development side, tons of opportunity there for someone more versed in the science and engineering side of things to really have something really strong.
Yeah, I'm glad it gives you such a great leg up, especially in the development part of the project. Thank you so much for sharing. Really appreciate it. I'd like to move on and welcome Sean Fallon. Sean is a senior staff engineer at Invenergy in Chicago. He graduated from WashU in 2018 with a double major in chemical engineering and economics and strategy with a minor in energy engineering. Sean also holds a Park Renewable Energy and the Environment Certificate. Currently, Sean is leading design of numerous utility scale projects through the country and is involved in activities all the way from site evaluation to permitting to final design and construction. Sean, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Sure. So I'll start with my background. When I came into WashU, I knew I wanted to work in renewable energy. I had no idea what I wanted to do with that, but I knew that it was a really interesting field, changing very rapidly and had the potential to really help a lot of people. So I really started this with trying to understand the energy industry as a whole. So my first job, actually, my first internship was as a chemical engineer for Dynegy, working at coal and natural gas plants. And that was a really good way to understand the current energy industry. Didn't really want to stay there. So I also, while at WashU, worked as a consultant for an Irish biogas company and interned with Straight Up Solar. They're a smaller residential and commercial focused company in St. Louis, and actually was a renewable energy associate with Taylor in the sustainability office. So all of those were really interesting and helped expose me to different facets of the industry. And it was there that I realized I really wanted to work on larger projects, utility scale. And I saw that solar was one of the most rapidly evolving, quickly growing parts of the renewable energy industry. So that led me to Invenergy, which is the largest private renewable energy developer in the world. And Invenergy does work in wind, solar, batteries, desalination, transmission, all sorts of different technologies, which is really interesting because even though I work as a solar engineer helping design and build a few gigawatts of solar projects throughout the country, I get to learn about so many different types of technologies and the future of batteries and other distributed technologies is being driven by some of the things that Invenergy is participating in. And it's really cool to be exposed to that while also getting to work on these really interesting projects.
Thanks so much, Sean. Quick follow-up question for you as well. You said you'd come into WashU already knowing that energy is a focus and passion of yours. Do you remember what spurred this passion?
Not really. I think I always thought it was an interesting field, but one of the things that really solidified working renewable energy as the career path I wanted to take was when I was at the UN climate negotiations in Germany back at COP23. And that was really interesting because there's this speaker, he was a cultural leader from a small island in the Pacific, and he was talking about how his community's home was being destroyed by rising sea levels and they were losing their culture. And that really underscored the urgency of solving climate change and really led me to try to make the biggest impacts I could on emissions. And I found that through solar.
Thanks so much, Sean. Really appreciate you sharing your background and your passions. Sounds like it's really interesting work you're doing. I'd like to introduce our final panelist, Rachel Goldstein. She is a solar and storage analyst at SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association. She graduated from WashU in 2014 with a bachelor's in environmental biology and environmental engineering. She then went to get a master's degree from Johns Hopkins in energy policy and climate science. Currently, Rachel was involved in local organizing and activism with DC's climate justice group, 350 DC. Rachel, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the path of talking about the way that I got to where I am today, and then a little bit about what my role currently looks like. I think I have a couple of years on most of the people on this panel. Interestingly enough, we all have really similar paths. As a student, I was also a renewable energy intern at the Office of Sustainability under Phil. I think that when I started as a sophomore in 2011 or 12, that was the first year that the office was accepting interns. So it was really cool to be part of that first crop of students being involved in everything. When I came to WashU, I knew that I wanted to focus on environmental and climate issues. I didn't really know where I could make the biggest impact, and I was pretty good at biology in high school, so I decided to take the science track, as many of us here on this panel did. Decided to dive headfirst into the environmental biology major along with the environmental engineering minor, figuring if I was going to work on like protecting the rainforest and fighting climate change, I may as well know what's going on. And I found that that was a really wonderful combination to have a great sense of the real science, understand climate science, understand land use issues, land issues, conservation issues, I spent time one summer in Costa Rica studying tropical rainforest ecosystems. And the more I learned, I kind of want to say the more angry I became. I found that we are kind of living in a world that doesn't take science seriously and doesn't know how to apply it properly. And while I think I started out college wanting to like go the PhD route and become a scientist and like study bugs in the jungle for the rest of my life, the more that I did that and learned about it, the more I was like, I really need to do something where I can like feel the tangible impacts of what's going on. As a student, I was also very involved in green action. A few friends and I founded the fossil fuel divestment campaign that I think is still ongoing at WashU. And I just bring that up because it was incredibly formative in me making my decisions and getting onto the path that I'm on now. So while I was taking all these hard science classes and these engineering classes, when I graduated, I decided I wanted to just be a full-time activist. And I wound up doing a year-long fellowship with Green Corps, which is a one-year-long fellowship program that kind of bops you around the country working on different environmental campaigns. I worked in the Midwest on a Beyond Coal campaign with the Sierra Club, working to shut down a coal plant. I worked in Vermont on a carbon tax campaign, worked in Boston on some canvassing for clean water issues. And as I did that, I started to find that the way that we were using activism in that standard was not really the way that I wanted to be advocating for the things that I cared about. And I also came from a very analytical and scientific background and wanted to see how I could apply that. At the same time, I think I am like an activist deep down and I never wanted to give that up. So ended up moving to Washington, D.C., got a job with the Wind Energy Foundation, which is kind of the nonprofit arm of AWEA, the American Wind Energy Association, which works very closely with Ørsted. And so I was kind of a campaign associate doing various tasks there and learning about the wind industry and more about the renewables industry and getting to actually reapply my analytical skills. And simultaneously, outside of work, completely volunteered, was helping start this organization with some friends here in DC called 350 DC under the big 350.org umbrella. Because I knew that no matter what I was doing on the renewable energy side, I couldn't give up the boots on the ground, grassroots organizing work that I found really, really formative in my college years and the year after college. So did a year with that group that was kind of an offshoot of AWEA, sort of didn't want to stick around there and wound up finding my way into SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, which is sort of a sister group to AWEA. They work on wind. We do the same thing with solar. I actually started out in the membership department because that's kind of where I could get myself in the door there. And I knew that I really wanted to stick in the renewable industries space, preferably moving over to solar. I didn't really think a company was the right fit for me, but I liked the advocacy and work that trade associations do. So while I did work in the membership department for a year, I really was kind of itching to get into the analytical work and the research work and kind of formed some of those relationships within the organization. And then when a position opened up on our research team, I kind of hopped on that and luckily had some advocates within the organization who were like, yeah, you'd be a really good fit for this. And got my way into the position that I'm in now as a solar and storage analyst. I'll also mention my grad degree at Johns Hopkins. I was doing it part-time while I was working. If anybody watching is interested in grad degrees, especially fresh out of college, I would highly, highly recommend getting a couple years of work experience under your belt and considering if a part-time degree is a better fit for you. For me, it was a really, really good decision to do my degree part-time while I was working. It just became way more applicable. Everything I was learning, I was also applying in real time. And I had a salary, which was nice. So here I am now at SEIA, the Solar Energy Industries Association, on the research team. My role there as solar and storage analyst, I obviously analyze issues related to the solar industry and the storage industry. And when I say storage, what I mean by that is energy storage, battery systems, solar is considered a variable resource. So storage becomes a very important piece of the puzzle to getting high penetrations of solar energy on the grid. So my work revolves quite a bit around market research, tracking systems that have been deployed by groups like Invenergy or otherwise. I think we heard Cypress Creek Renewables before. My organization as a trade association actually works very closely with groups like all of those from that the other panelists work for. And what I mean when I say trade association, because that doesn't fit neatly into the nonprofit, for-profit, company, whatnot, doesn't really fit into any of those boxes. Technically, we're a C6. We are technically a nonprofit, but what we do is we advocate on behalf of industries. So we'll go to the Hill and discuss with politicians why we want certain things done, which bills and policies are going to be best for the solar industry. Lately, a lot of our work has been revolving around COVID relief for solar workers who are being hit incredibly hard by the coronavirus economic impacts. So that's been a huge focus of our work lately. And our job is really to keep the industry afloat, to do what we can to advocate for bills on the Hill that are going to benefit the industry, talk to companies and see where they're facing challenges. We do work with both distributed generation, which is the smaller scale solar like rooftop and on top of Walmarts and Targets, and also utility scale solar like the kind of work that Sean does. Yeah, I'll pause there. I'm sure that we'll have more to talk about there too.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate you talking about your story and kind of highlighting the shifts in your trajectory. I'm really glad that you spent some time on your activism experience because, well, one, for WashU students, your legacy of fossil-free WashU still lives on. It's well
So glad
known.
to hear that.
Yeah, it's quite the force for sure. I wanted to take a quick minute on the activism piece because it's not a very typical career. There are a lot of WashU students who are passionate about activism, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a takeaway, perhaps in your years of experience, something that activism within the energy space helped you understand maybe about the industry that you're applying today.
Yeah, so I am still involved in activism. One thing I'll say is no matter what your career is, if you care about something, you can still do that thing. You might not get paid for it, but you know, we all have hobbies. Some people want to go to the gym after work. Some people want to go to happy hour. So I like to do all those things too, but one thing I really like to do is organize with my friends and work on local climate justice projects that I don't really get to do in my day job. I will say there are moments when my activist work comes into conflict with my day job, and that is something that I need to reconcile and consider as I do that work. Whether it's like, you know, kind of a through the beltway inside game policy that we're working on, and then the more outside game strategy of activism looks a little differently than that. However, I think it's been super mutually beneficial. I bring a lot of knowledge from my day job into those activist spaces. I've done presentations for the group that I work with on how utilities work, on how distributed resources work, on energy democracy. So having knowledge from somebody with a career in the renewable space can bring a lot of really beneficial work to local organizers and people who just want a cleaner, healthier environment in their neighborhood. And then vice versa, my activist work has really informed my day job in pushing for some work that I think is really important. We do a lot of work on carbon impact analysis, my team does, and just being able to come in with a background on like what communities are looking for, what concerns people. I think when you're doing really heavy analytical work, you often lose sight of what people actually want and are thinking. But if you can like really keep your boots on the ground and keep working with ordinary people and with your local community, you have a much better sense of what's actually meaningful to people. And then you're not just going into this super wonky policy space all the time with your kind of not very relatable content that you're working on. You can actually bring in those perspectives to the rest of your team and help make sure that they're staying on track and understand who they're really working for.
Thanks so much. Yeah, the interplay between knowledge generation and grassroots efforts is it's fascinating and also very important. So I'm really glad you touched on that. That's a very unique perspective. So everyone, those were our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for sharing about yourself. We're really excited to have you here. This is just very interesting in general, and personally as a student who's really interested in going into renewable energy, it's very exciting to have you here and to hear about your so I would like to open up the discussion portion of the panel. First, if you've been hearing a little bit of piano in the background, I apologize, it's me. My dad is a piano professor and he's also working from home. So he's teaching a master class. I'll try to mute it from now on as much as I can. But as I open up the discussion section, I will be getting question inputs from the team here. I will also be glancing at the chat. So if you have any questions as things come up, if you've had any questions, please go ahead. Feel free to include that in our Q&A chat. What I'd like to do is I have a little bit of a structure here planned. What I'd like to do is first ask you all a bit about, give us an overview of the industry. What industry like, just so students and community members can wrap their minds around this energy industry that tends to be a little bit like nebulous to grasp, like exactly what it all entails and what it's like. Then I'd like to talk about your journey and your WashU experience, seeing what's been helpful, what you recommend, because I'm sure a lot of students are would very much like to know what your takeaways from the WashU experience have been. So starting out with an industry overview, one of the ways I was thinking might be helpful to approach this is if you all could give me just maybe 3 words that you would say describe the energy industry. I think that would be really helpful in kind of hearing your say of what the character of the industry is right now. Does anyone have any particular preference?
I can start.
Thank you.
So we claim to represent the industry, so I feel like I should know what to say here. But I would say solar coaster, as in roller coaster. There's a lot of up and downs in a burgeoning industry, and we are currently dealing with a lot of those up and downs right now in this economic situation.
And I guess to add on to that, one of the things, at least that attracted me to the industry when I was first looking at it is, you know, the word that sort of keeps coming up for me is multidisciplinary, in the sense that regardless of what your background is professionally or academically, there really is a role for you to play in some, you know, spot within the industry. And that was something that, you know, was very exciting for me as I was trying to carve out exactly what that niche would be for me. But I also would agree with Rachel's characterization of the solar coaster, and that can be frightening. But what I would also say is there is a reassuring side of that, in the sense that the industry has been through so many up and downs, whether it was 0809, whether it was the solar tariffs that happened a year or 2 years ago, and now with COVID-19. We're an industry that's been tested quite a few times, and yes, there are contractions during certain periods, but we've always come back stronger, and, you know, we continue to grow even despite all of that volatility. So it can be scary, especially when you're a newer entrant into the space, but it's also something that keeps you on your toes. And at the end of the day, you know, it's something that's going to continue pushing forward.
Yeah, just to add on to what Taylor said, I think for me, the growth opportunity, both, you know, from a personal and professional level, but also industry wide. I just wanted to jump into something where I could see it, having a huge impact down the road, both sustainably, but, also for me, seeing my impact be felt. The benefit about the solar industry, there's so many companies you can go into that focus on a lot of different things, whether that's large utility scale projects, hundreds of megawatts in the desert, to smaller residential focused companies. There's always a place for you, big company, small company, that you can get into and where you can have your impact felt. And to Taylor's point about the industry, yes, there are times when, the hit has been felt, especially now with COVID-19, with the investment tax credits decreasing, although there's talk about those coming back. All these things that, would seem to put a barrier in, the front of solar energy and its growth really haven't, in the long run, played too much of an issue. Like, it impacts the industry for a couple months or a year, but we've just seen tremendous growth from, even a year ago. So there's just so much opportunity in this area and so much more room to grow too.
Yeah, I think you all covered it pretty well. It's ever evolving, very impactful to the communities that we work in, and it is innovative. It overcomes challenges, and that's what makes it interesting.
Thank you all for your input. It sounds like a very dynamic place to find a career for sure. We have, while we're on the topic of a high-level overview of the industry, we have a really fascinating question actually from Phil Valco. He is asking, what are the biggest barriers to renewable energy deployment, and how can we remove these barriers to accelerate decarbonization? Does anybody have any insight they'd like to share on this?
I guess briefly, from one thing, not everyone can have solar on their house or, be in close proximity to solar per se. So, since it's powered by the sun, you're not always in an area where you can, take advantage of, a solar panels on your roof. But a big push in the industry now, I would say, is, knowing that that's the case, getting into larger scale utility developed projects, community solar projects, where you can have whole towns, whole cities on, a multitude of projects and all receiving a benefit that way. There's a lot of indirect ways of quote unquote receiving renewable or solar energy, renewable energy. If you're not, directly connected to such a array or site. So I think that's really important, and a place the industry has shown tremendous growth in the past year and a half is, opening up the path to supporting this energy movement by anyone.
Yeah, and adding on to what Jordan said, I think that one of the biggest factors, at least, from my perspective, that drives which markets we target, the locations that we develop in, is actually a lot of local policy. So there's this interesting mismatch where some of the regions of the country with the best solar resource, for example, have some of the lowest rates of development, whereas Minnesota has one of the most successful solar programs in the country on the sort of large C&I, small utility scale. And a lot of that is driven by a local community solar program, or even just down to the counties, whether it's zoning laws or statewide incentives. It can really sort of run the gamut size-wise. But I think that having taking down those barriers that say do not exist for other types of generation, and extending those to renewables is really important for deploying that. And that's also, I'm not necessarily saying that the industry has to rely on, say, a crutch of incentives or anything like that. It's more about leveling the playing field to sort of lower those barriers to entry and create, more of an open market around that. And I think that that's something that, we've seen, especially when I was at Cypress, we saw some pretty major policy changes and purpose that essentially shut down our development in some of our core markets. So it was interesting to see just how much local policy can really affect the activity.
Yeah, I want to emphasize what both of you just said. you both kind of brought up policy issues, and I just want it to be very clear to anyone interested in the renewable energy space that the barriers we're facing today really aren't technological. Of course, we'd love to have higher efficiency panels and amazing like long-term storage resources. That would be great. But the real barriers we face today are state and federal level policies that block us or like don't allow us to compete on a level playing field with incumbent generators. So as you're considering a career in this space, like becoming really familiar with state policy, federal policy around energy, regulatory markets, that's where the barriers exist. The barriers are not so much on the technology side.
And if you don't mind me jumping in, Rachel, it's really interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. There's actually a question just submitted by David wondering about energy storage technology. What is the read of the room, I guess, on whether or not we are ready to deploy utility scale storage technology with technological advancements? Is it necessary as much as we'd anticipated? Do you have any insights?
Yeah, I have a lot of insight here. I actually wrote my thesis for grad school on this exact topic. So David, feel free to reach out to me later too if you want more info. But we are already deploying utility scale storage. I think Invenergy is working on a few projects there, so Sean might have some things to say there. Lithium ion batteries are kind of capturing the market right now. I think eventually we'll see some more long-term storage opportunities. So a battery really only can store for 4 to 8 hours or so. There's some talk about seasonal storage through like hydrogen storage, essentially. That's a little bit more on the research and development side. But those batteries, lithium ion batteries, do exist. Many projects, utility scale projects for solar are being designed with storage in mind and alongside storage projects. So it's already a growing market. We're kind of seeing it following that same exponential growth that solar is experiencing, but it's just about a decade behind. But it's very much a space. If you're interested in renewables, going into the energy storage industry would also be a very smart route to take.
Yeah, and I'll add on that the storage industry definitely is well underway. As Rachel alluded to, we have several utility scale solar projects already built or in construction or development. We actually have some solar plus storage as well, including a project in Mexico called Insurgentes. It's a solar plus storage project. So yeah, there definitely is a lot of technology out there and it works. Right now, one of the biggest challenges is really trying to figure out exactly how we want to use that technology, because there's so many different applications. Rachel alluded to kind of having a longer term storage for seasonal applications, but in the interim, in the short term, there are lots of things you can do, such as just firming the grid or helping regulate grid frequency or energy arbitrage. Lots of various ancillary markets that really can influence the economics of a project. And once there's a better understanding of that controls side, then that will be one of the things that can help accelerate the storage industry even faster.
Thank you both so much for your input. Yeah, the storage question is always a fascinating one, and every time I do a deep dive or I hear from people, it sounds like it's just constantly evolving. So thank you for sharing your insight on that. It's very valuable. Moving into, we've done a pretty good overview of the industry. Moving closer into jobs, Dugan sent in a question that is really several questions, and honestly, I think hits the crux of what a lot of students probably want to know. He's asking, what experience do renewable companies look for in potential hires? Like, like, how much experience do you need? Do you need experience before you walk in the door? Does a grad degree count? Does a grad degree help? Does anybody have any insight on level of experience, both academic or professional?
I mean, speaking as someone who, whose academic background has absolutely nothing to do with what I do on a daily basis, I would say that the most valuable component for me for getting my foot into the door was just sort of accumulating various professional experiences. A lot of that just started off with, smaller sort of like side projects or, internships, and then sort of just building off of that incrementally. That isn't to say that, you need to have 4 different internships that are all exactly related to what you want to do under your belt. But I think, showing a demonstrated interest, whether it's in your internships or other jobs or your academic pursuits or your extracurriculars, is really important, because a lot of people do also just focus on a passion for the subject matter and, a general willingness to learn and drive to grow in that space. So even if your resume isn't exactly tailored to the position that you want, having the desire to really move quickly and learn quite a bit sort of on the fly is also very much valued, at least from a project finance background. There is no project finance degree. Even a traditional finance degree doesn't really help you that much in this space. So a lot of it is just sort of learning on the job, and any way that you can demonstrate your willingness and ability to do that is definitely goes a long way.
Yeah, I'll quickly allude to one friend I have at Invenergy. We actually have a mentorship program, so he's my mentor. His undergrad degrees were in marketing and rock and roll history, and now he is the leader of our acquisition and divestiture development practice. So really interesting. You can have a lot of different backgrounds, and yeah, Taylor's right. One of the most important things is just a passion for renewable energy and a willingness to learn. Now, that being said, it certainly is very helpful to get whatever real project experiences or internships you can. And I did find it difficult to find some of those internships when at WashU. And one thing that I did was reaching out to companies, and even if I didn't see an internship position advertised, I would try to talk with somebody at the company and figure out how I might be able to help out and essentially create my own internship program if I could.
Yeah, just to kind of talk to all those points, really just a willingness to learn, like Taylor said, but also, as Sean mentioned, just talking to as many people as you can. Sort of how I fell into the scene was, through WashU program. So I know there's Reset now. It didn't exist when I was around, unfortunately, but I was part of the Sustainability Exchange, working with the Tyson Research Center on a solar project they were thinking of doing. So there was a lot of great exposure there at a WashU class that just, was added on to everything else. Going to, panels like these, exposing yourself, talking to people. I remember there was a panel, at WashU, and there was a couple solar finance people there, just talking to them, and, through there, got myself an interview with one of the companies. So there's really just a willingness to put yourself out there and, say, hey, I'm interested. Hey, I want to do anything you can offer me, because, a lot of companies, my company is hiring, and we don't look for tons of experience with solar, with finance, or with environmental policy. It's more so a passion to learn about all those things, because we're more than happy to teach to someone who wants to gather up as much as they can.
Also note, if you're trying to get your foot in the door in these places, you might have remembered me saying I took a job on our membership team, even though that wasn't really what I wanted to do, kind of with the intention of like getting into the industry and then seeing where I could finagle my way into a job that I really would be very excited about. I learned a lot in that role on the membership team, but I never imagined myself being kind of like a salesperson. If you see a position like that, or like a position that's not exactly up your alley, but it's at a place you'd be really excited to work, you should still consider it because you're going to make a ton of connections just by working in a place like that. I'll also say, since I do hire people and I read a lot of resumes for interns and otherwise, I often start with the cover letter, and if I don't see anything about a passion for climate or solar or renewables or energy in that cover letter, and all I see is that you're into data and like analysis and science and whatnot, I'm not going to grant you an interview. Your cover letters need to be very good, and they should definitely reference both the company that you're interested in and a passion for this field specifically. So those are the two pieces of advice I'd give is make sure you know that the employer knows that you want to work there, and be really flexible about the kinds of jobs you're willing to accept, because once you have your foot in the door, it's way easier to get to the spot that you really want to be in.
One other final thing on that topic I just have to mention, I've been laughing about it a little bit. Taylor, Jordan, and I were friends at WashU, and we're all working in the renewable energy industry now. And Jordan and I were actually roommates our freshman and sophomore year. And I have to say, there are a lot of really smart, really passionate people at WashU. And the student groups like Reset that's Sophia's been working on, and Net Impact and everything else is a great way to find other people that are also interested in what you want to do, and then work with them to try to better understand the industry and figure out what roles you might want to apply to. So definitely try to talk with a lot of people. And I know it's a bit difficult this semester in particular, but as an ongoing basis, I've found that WashU alums seem to be pretty friendly and typically respond to LinkedIn messages.
Yeah, and I'll second that. Among, quite a few of my friends, they look at the energy industry, and especially the renewable energy industry, as sort of a pretty niche area to work in. They really have no idea what I do on a day-to-day basis. So it was really great to sort of find my community, both at WashU, that, like Sean and I will still meet up in Chicago on a semi-regular basis when we're both in town. It is very nice to just leverage those connections and really create a community that's focused in around what you're really passionate about, both professionally and personally.
Thank you all for sharing. Some really, really valuable advice there for sure. Throughout the discussion, there had been a little bit of a theme in resources that you can leverage at WashU. Thank you to Sean and Jordan for bringing up Reset. Reset is actually, quick, shameless self-plug. Reset is actually a 3-credit class being offered in the fall of 2020. It's an interdisciplinary course that teaches you skills in engineering, finance, and policy. It's ENST 407 if you guys are interested in checking that out. But thank you for that moment. When it comes to your experience at WashU, WashU obviously has a ton of different programs, a ton of different resources. So much so, luckily, that it can get a little bit overwhelming at times. In looking for a job or developing experience for a job, were there any resources in particular that you had tapped at WashU that you thought were really helpful? Or are there any experiences that, looking back, you wish that you had taken advantage of?
I think one thing for me at WashU, like Sophia said, there's so many things you can involve yourself with. And yes, now I think there happens to be more renewable energy focused things you can involve yourself in. But, back when I was at WashU, there wasn't a lot outside. One of the regrets I had was not joining the Office of Sustainability. Like I think the rest of my panelists, that was one thing I didn't do that I wish I had done as an intern or whatnot. But beyond that, there's so many other classes at WashU that can give you the skills you need in this renewable energy space. So talking specifically about solar, if you want to go into the finance side, if you want to really involve yourself in the transactions on tax equity, on perm debt, what have you, the finance classes are a natural way to go, really making sure your Excel skills are good. All of that lends itself there. If you're more interested in the initial development side, if you want to, look at a piece of land and say, hey, for these reasons, it would be great to develop solar renewable energy on the land, then looking at the engineering focus classes, the science classes, soil science, hydrology on the environmental side are classes I took that I don't really use now, but someone in the initial development side would definitely use. So there's a lot of courses that you may not think, oh, it's not like a renewable energy course, but from my experience, really renewable energy isn't really, you can't really have you can have a major for it, but it's really an interdisciplinary sort of major that takes a lot in from finance, from engineering, from science, from liberal arts to policy. It takes in a lot of different things in order to make renewable energy work. So there's a lot of different avenues you can choose to focus yourself in, or just explore them all. But really, it's personally, I read resumes. I'm not necessarily looking for renewable energy specific coursework or stuff like that. Just an interest in it, and then also through that showing the interest in the classes that you've taken.
Yeah, and a few of those classes in particular that I found particularly helpful. I, of course, through the UN class was I took Beth's International Climate Negotiations class. That was really interesting. I also did the Sustainability Exchange and helped out with the Climate Action Program. The trip to Thailand as part of the Chemical Engineering International Experience class was really interesting, but I really enjoyed the Center for Experiential Learning classes. So as you can tell, this is all very project focused and very immersive, but those classes were particularly useful because it didn't just give you a really interesting way to apply what you learn in the classroom, but it's also a real life experience that you can talk about in interviews, put on your resume, and even apply once you have a full-time job. So I really liked those as well. And also echoing Jordan a little bit, it's very difficult to have renewable energy specific engineering classes at times. I am the only chemical engineer on this solar team. We have mechanical engineers, electrical, civil, structural, geotech, and a few others. So lots of different backgrounds, but the common theme is trying to get that real world experience and getting the ancillary classes when we can.
So Alexander has a very interesting question, actually, still on the topic of energy jobs, but from a bit of a different perspective. Rather than looking for jobs straight out of college, Alexander's wondering how to transition from industry to industry potentially. Alexander is going to be working as an investment banking analyst after graduation, and is interested in simultaneously exploring options in the renewable energy or energy space. This is to the whole panel, but also Taylor and Jordan, do you have any insight on what shifting career paths looks like within the energy space, and how that would look like in renewable finance?
So I haven't personally, moved between industries. Again, I was sort of like laser focused in on renewables from day one, but I have had quite a few colleagues who have pivoted from various different finance backgrounds or from, completely different careers as well. And I would say, especially having an investment banking background, that's definitely valued on the project finance side of things as well. They sort of would be able to trust that you could learn the models quickly, learn some of sort of the more bespoke tax issues or anything like that. But I think that, having a sort of a tangentially related professional experience is definitely valued. And again, if you pair that with, a genuine interest and passion for the sort of like mission behind the work as well, that would, definitely set you up very well to pivot pretty easily into a renewables finance job or, a job in the industry in general.
Yeah, to kind of build off that. So my first internship was not renewable energy related at all. I actually worked at, a boutique investment bank firm. It was an aviation focused firm. So, how we use solar in our models, it was using planes in the models. And so it was really, like Taylor said, the familiarization with the models that helped a lot, when I decided to, it was an internship, but focus in renewable energy really helped a lot to say, hey, I can understand the models. I can look at it, and understand where all your finance terms, where all your, initial thoughts came from, and can build off that and help improve it sometimes. And so it helps to have that background. But like Taylor said, it's really pairing that with a genuine interest in renewables. So I think you mentioned in your question that you had worked a little on the buy side of DG stuff. Yeah, so that's great to have that interest. If you really liked it, really talk about that a lot. Talk about, why you like that. And if you want to transition away from an IB to, a developer like, the company I work for, there's a ton of need on the financing side for people to understand the models, but also understand how larger investor institutions understand the models. Because if you already know how like an IB understands a model, you'll be able to take that knowledge to a solar developer where, that knowledge may not be there, and just say, hey, I can help bridge the gap between talking to an investor who has a totally different set of, rules and standards that they need to meet versus on the solar side, how we can help meet those standards. So, there's no really need to feel like you don't have the experience in renewable energy or, how am I going to transition this stuff? Because the renewable energy field is very flexible. As long as you have a passion in it, you'll go very far.
Yeah, I'll just, oh, go ahead, John.
Invenergy actually does have a good chunk of our project finance team coming from investment banking backgrounds. And then we also have more of a portfolio finance team that deals with refinancing and operating projects. So those are both potential routes that could be very applicable. And I guess similar to your particular background, I do have a friend. He worked in investment banking. He was on Guggenheim's energy group, and then he transitioned into clean energy, clean tech venture capital. So that's not necessarily a straight renewables project finance role, but it's another very natural career progression.
Thank you guys so much. I really hope that answered Alexander's question. It sure was very interesting from my perspective. I have a question that steps away from renewable energy jobs for a moment. There are both Bennett and Erica asking questions having to do with biofuels and natural gas. These two sources of energy have been pretty widely touted as a bridge away from fossil fuels or a road to renewables. What Erica specifically would like to know is within the industry, within the renewable energy industry, what does the acceptance for that look like? Is that something that you guys think is necessary or feasible? And is this claim that transitioning to natural gas and biofuels is a legitimate first step?
I have a ton to say on this, so I'll mostly be addressing Erica's question here. I'm not super well versed on biofuels, My personal take is that we should abandon natural gas. Like, we don't need it. We need, it is not a bridge fuel. It is an off ramp. We need to get off that ramp as soon as possible. I think a conflict that I've had to reconcile with in my career is a lot of major energy players in the solar space are subsidiaries of large fossil fuel industries. As somebody who also helped found Fossil Free WashU and thinks that CEOs of fossil fuel companies are criminals, and I know that's some strong wording, but that is, they are literally frying the planet. It is difficult because a lot of the renewable energy companies that are really big players are like the way that they are able to exist is by being a subsidiary of a larger energy company. I think it's a positive that energy companies are moving more to renewable energy. I think back to a speech from Bill McKibben a long time ago in like 2011 or 2012 when I saw him speak at WashU, where he said, we need to turn fossil fuel companies into energy companies, and those energy companies need to be renewable energy companies. There might be companies that have historically dealt in oil and gas. I think it's a positive when they do have a solar subsidiary or a solar division. I want to see that expand dramatically, and I want to see their other divisions contract dramatically. So it is a thing that you do need to reconcile with and think about as you, if like sticking to principles and morals and really strong held beliefs like those that I hold come into conflict sometimes with the companies that I work with and advocate on behalf of. The way that I really see it is that a lot of these companies are not going to disappear into the abyss. They're going to move over to a new segment of the energy sector. And we should be encouraging them to make those moves because if you're starting with a very large company that has a really strong footing in the energy space, they're going to be quite successful in whatever energy source they're using, whether that's wind and solar or natural gas. I don't see natural gas as a bridge fuel. I see it as maybe it was a bridge fuel 15 years ago. Now it's time to get off of that bridge. And I think that a lot of companies do like to greenwash with touting their renewables subsidiaries and say, oh, look, we have a solar like division that's like 1% of their market. But I think it is a positive when companies truly are choosing to move that direction. I think Invenergy is definitely one of the companies that's moving that direction. I'm a little more skeptical of other companies that are large gas and oil companies that have divisions. And I think right now, part of my job is really to show companies already in the energy space why renewables is where they should move towards and why they should sort of get out of the incumbent space, because that is a dying industry. Oil and gas and coal are dying industries, and they need to make that transition now.
Yeah, and adding on to that, you know, working at Ørsted, it's actually quite an interesting position. About 10 years ago, we were known as Danish Oil and Natural Gas. And then about 10 years ago, we actually made a concerted effort as a company, or just sort of a final decision, to completely move away from all of our fossil-based generation. So we've actually now completely pivoted to renewables generation, and we're just named actually the most sustainable company in the world. So it's actually quite interesting, being at an organization that has pivoted fairly quickly to make that transition, and has actually done so very, successfully, both in an implementation standpoint as well as a financial standpoint. I think that, the attitude of the company, which, sort of aligns with my general perspective, at least with, utilizing gas as a bridge fuel, is that, as Rachel mentioned, maybe it made sense 10, 15 years ago, but now it makes a lot more sense to maybe invest all of those resources and those efforts, instead of funneling those to a temporary solution, to instead focus on, say, decarbonizing, fossil-based sectors, whether it's automobiles, whether it's, in like cement production, steel production, more industrial processes, and moving to a world where, A, those are electrified processes, and then B, greening the grid so that you can easily leverage wind, solar, and other renewable sources to then feed those formerly carbon-heavy processes.
Yeah, and as these transitions take place, it really underscores the importance of developing robust grid control systems, trying to better understand as I referred to earlier, how we want to dispatch batteries, how we may need to look at demand response or other ways of building solar plants to optimize energy production during certain key hours. Because there is the challenge of intermittency and variability. Solar without storage is not very dispatchable, and that could cause issues for, say, a stormy week or when a big plant goes offline. So that's definitely a challenge, but it's not one that can't be overcome within however long it takes.
Thank you all for your input on that. Speaking frankly, as a student who is, trying to get full perspective of the energy industry, it can be very difficult sometimes to understand all of the interconnected, all of the dynamics of the industry, and being online, like there are a lot of different opinions and perspectives on things. So it's very, very valuable to hear from alums that are in the field that are saying like, yes, this is possible, we can get there. It's reassuring and exciting. It makes me really hopeful. It looks like we have time for one last question. Then I'll give the panelists a moment to give like a final comment and turn it back over to Sarah. This final question comes from Patty Catsby. I'm sure some of you guys know her from WashU's Career Center. She's wondering what professional organizations do you all belong to in terms of staying connected and in terms of staying up to date on cutting edge technology and innovation in your respective areas?
I think some of the valuable resources that I've utilized over the past few years have obviously been SIA and AWEA, just, generally staying connected with other professionals in the renewables industry. On top of that, over the last probably 2 years or so, I've become a little bit more involved with RISE, which is essentially a professional organization focused on women working in renewable energy. It is still very much a male-dominated industry, and it is really nice getting to connect with women who are, working in various aspects of the industry, whether it's wind or solar, and coming together and discussing, the latest in the industry, attending conferences together, and then also just sort of focusing in on, some of like the gender dynamics that are also sort of underlying the industry as well, that you might not necessarily get at your traditional trade organization as well.
Yeah, and I think also, SIA is a great resource that, I'm sure all of us here in the renewable energy field use. And locally too, there's tons of smaller local organizations. EnergyWorks is a career, it's like an Indeed for renewable energy, the renewable energy field, but they also put on young professional networking events or professional networking events. I don't know throughout the country, but at least on the East Coast, tons of events that, I can go to and surround myself with people locally who are also part of that renewable energy field. So it's really, especially in this day and age, with LinkedIn so readily accessible, with your phone so readily accessible, it's very easy to stay in touch with the connections you meet at conferences and also just the people around you working in the same field.
I just want to do another plug for RISE. They're awesome. That's WRISE. Yeah, Women in Renewable Industries and Sustainable Energy. So I'm a little bit involved with them. I was a fellow with the Clean Energy Leadership Institute a couple of years ago. It is a program you need to apply for, and I think they have chapters now they started in DC where I am. They now have chapters in San Francisco and Chicago. It's a little competitive. I think you do need a couple years of work experience under your belt, but I will say being part of that network as an alum has been a really good way for me to stay in the loop about what's happening in the policy world, and people will post things like, hey, this just happened in this state, like what do we all think? And just being able to stay up to date there is really helpful. In DC, there's a lot of networking opportunities. I kind of hate networking. It's a very DC thing to do, but I will say like my better experiences have been through these like energy happy hours and green drinks happy hours and whatnot. There's a lot of opportunities, especially if you're in a big city. If you're in a smaller city or a more rural area, there are probably opportunities there as well. They might be more digital, but definitely seek those out because they do exist. I also will say podcasts can really teach you a lot. I'd really recommend listening to The Energy Gang. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of them, but The Energy Gang is a really good one to just like keep you in the loop on what's happening on a weekly basis. And reading news sources like Green Tech Media, E&D, Politico, Morning Energy are really going to keep you in the loop on what's going on.
And adding on to Rachel's recommendations, some of the resources that I leveraged most before, starting my career were obviously, Energy Gang, Green Tech Media. Also, if you're interested more on the finance side of things, Norton Rose Fulbright is very useful. And Infocast also has, a whole renewables focused sort of knowledge sharing group, and they also host quite a few free webinars that really take you on like a 2-hour deep dive into tax equity or debt or general market trends. So if you're trying to break into the space, that's sort of the best way to educate yourself. And nowadays where we can't attend conferences in person anyways, trying to leverage those virtual resources is really helpful.
Yeah, I've definitely found a lot of those resources to be very useful. Additionally, I really like PV magazine, photovoltaic magazine. Has a lot of project news, and it can be a bit more technical, which is useful. Invenergy has a couple development groups within the company that I found very useful. So the Invenergy Women's Network is great. We have a lot of networking events, speakers, mentorship programs, stuff like that. And yeah, SIA is interesting as well. And so are a lot of the industry conferences like Solar Power International or Intersolar. So those are definitely useful, but I really like just the WashU alumni network in general, because there is a good alumni presence in Chicago. So just going to whatever random events there happen to be is always a great way to meet people and learn a little bit more.
Amazing for sharing. It does look like we are running out of time, and I do want to make sure that Sarah and the team get the opportunity to wrap up with enough time. So thank you all so much for being panelists. We love hearing from you. It's always so great to stay in touch. And thank you so much for sharing all of your valuable insights. I would like to hand it back off to Sarah. Sarah, take it away.
Wow, hi. Thank you so much, Sophia. That was an amazing discussion. And I want to extend another thank you to Taylor, Sean, Rachel, and Jordan, and once again, Sophia. This was a conversation driven out of feedback from our past conversations. So that has, in the past, we have been able to get feedback from our attendees. So we want to do that again here. Is there a problem with my screen? I don't know. But if everyone who's participating could take their devices and go to www.menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and enter the code 660522. You should see that on the screen now. That can put you on our interactive webpage where you can enter 2 topics that you would like to be interested in talking about for next semester. This would be really helpful for us and the program, the climate change program. So we can see as we're going, some of those topics are coming in. That's great to see. Yeah, so thank you. And also I want to give a quick plug. If you're interested in hearing anything more, learning more about the WashU Climate Change Program, you can visit our website at climatechange.wustl.edu. So thank you. Yeah, keep those responses coming. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
So I just wanted to jump back in and echo the thank yous to Sarah, Sophia, and all of our panelists, and for all of you for joining us here tonight. And I'm loving all of the topics that I'm seeing pop up through the Menti site. We really do appreciate it. And so we'll take all of these and they'll help inform the conversations that we will have next year. So thank you all very much. For all of you students, good luck in the last week of classes. Take care of yourselves and stay healthy. And thank you to all of you. You can continue, we're gonna sign off, but you can continue to populate the Menti site. So thank you and have a good evening.